In both The Great Gatsby and The Grapes of Wrath, the conflict and differences between the East and West plays a central and important role. First of all, in The Great Gatsby, the conflict of East versus West represents the differences between the old aristocracy and the traditionally wealthy, with the new wealth-owning class that developed during America's economic boom years of the 1920s. In the novel, the new rich are represented by those who live in West Egg. They are portrayed as being shallow, obsessed with achieving pleasure, and lacking in old-fashioned moral values and sensibilities. Gatsby is a clear example of this, with his penchant for extravagant parties. This contrasts with the old aristocracy of East Egg. They are portrayed as being more courteous and moral than their Western counterparts, and more tasteful, with the Buchanan's luxurious mansion and graceful dress sense being a clear representation of this. However, the East Eggers are also portrayed as being less caring than the West Eggers, as shown by the Buchanan's decision to simply abscond following Gatsby's death, as their wealth allows them to. Another example would be their disinterest in raising their daughter, who is portrayed as more of a status symbol than as a human being in her own right. This is in comparison to the West Egger Gatsby, who is shown to be a caring man through his infatuation with Daisy and his willingness to take the rap for her. As well as this, in a broader sense, the East of America is associated with the vulgarity and cynicism of New York City, whilst the West, typified by Minnesota, is connected to traditional and wholesome family values. This links into Fitzgerald's broader topic found within the novel of disillusionment with the American dream. The East represents the modern twisting of the dream, whilst the West represents it in a purer form, as it once was and is meant to be. In The Grapes of Wrath, the conflict of East versus West emerges as a struggle between the migrant people of the Eastern Dust Bowl and the selfishness of the inhabitants of the western state of California. Their conflict develops due to the migration of the impoverished migrants due to their loss of their lands and their livelihoods, forcing them to travel to California in search of work and housing. To them, California has been presented as a land of milk and honey, with plenty of well-paying jobs. In reality, it is a land of anger and resentment. The migrants have been lured to drive down wages, and now there are so many that the people of California have grown a loathing of them, and they call them Okies. They seem to them dirty, immoral, and threatening. Steinbeck presents a clear division between the two sets of people. Californians are wealthy, landowning, and selfish, wanting to hold on to their money and property at all costs, and despising the migrants and what they represent, and thereby seeking to punish them and keep them in servitude, whilst the migrants are selfless, altruistic, impoverished, dignified, and communal, seeking to help each other out of circumstances that were not their fault, and instead were caused by those with wealth, like the Californians. Throughout the novel, Steinbeck hints at a coming uprising amongst the migrants, a final heave to throw off the shackles of their Californian oppression, workers of the world unite, and all that jazz. The Californians are said to be scared of the migrants taking their land in the same way their ancestors took the land off of the Mexicans generations ago. All of this feeds into an atmosphere of anger and injustice, thereby perpetuating the conflict between East and West. By the way, that's my cat. She's very nice. The circumstances of the times when the books were written affect how they present the conflicts between East and West. In The Great Gatsby, the conflict is between the new and the traditional. It stems from the fact that the book was written in the mid-1920s, a time when Americans were facing prosperity like they had never seen before, and were liberated to enjoy that prosperity. Under President Calvin Coolidge, only the richest 2% of Americans paid income tax. This meant the traditional old money aristocracy were challenged by a new generation of wealthy entrepreneurs, some, like Gatsby, from relatively modest backgrounds. This caused a lasting resentment and a wish for some to return to the old days of clearly defined class structures and traditional values, in comparison to the carefree wealth of the time. In comparison, in The Grapes of Wrath, the conflict stems from a battle between the haves and the have-nots. Those who have money and those that don't. Those migrants from the East are impoverished and homeless, swarming like moths to the light of the rich and bountiful California. Here they are loathed for their scruffiness and willingness to encroach on the world of wealth and land ownership that abides amongst the more well-off Californians. This dichotomy breeds conflict as the Californians fear revolution from the migrants, and the migrants fear for their lives due to their low wages and lack of economic stability. This conflict differs from the one in Gatsby, and this can be attributed to the time in which it was set. Grapes of Wrath was written in the 1930s, following the Great Depression, And whereas Gatsby was a book about America's boom years, this is a book about its time of bust. It's a book about people being stripped of their livelihoods, and whether they have a lot or only a little, whether they can keep what they have or whether they will lose it. Whereas Gatsby is a book about how to best use wealth. Grapes of Wrath is a book about how to best face up to poverty. The books are both emblems of the time in which they were written, and it's the differences in these times that mean their central conflicts are ultimately different.